Hey there, folks. Brian King here, your resident ADHD coach, safe in quarantine here in Illinois. Big question for you. Is ADHD a mental health challenge, or is it just another expression of the diverse, you want to call it, the diverse rainbow of humanity? Well, there's an argument to be made for both sides, and I'd like to present them to you right now because my post that stated that ADHD was a mental health challenge was met with quite a bit of pushback, and rightfully so. So I want to make sure that I give weight to both sides so we can see the pros and cons, as well as recognize the double-edged sword that we're working with here. Let me start by sharing a comment that I received from one of my Facebook viewers. It's really comprehensive and demonstrates beautifully both sides of the conversation. This person said, bottom line, even if ADHD could be considered a mental health issue, and mind you, there is plenty of evidence to suggest you could, it doesn't matter. At this point in our society, it's become so entrenched that ADHD is not a real disorder and does not exist that it pretty much renders the thought completely meaningless. Nobody will ever take it seriously at this point, so why bother? Well, let's address that first, because that's simply not the case. It depends who you're talking to. If you do a simple Google search and you look up the Institutes of Mental Health, if you look at the DSM criteria, if you read a lot of the professional journals, clearly the professional community identifies ADHD as a developmental delay, as a mental challenge, as a psychiatric disorder. Forgive me for using that language. But there's a lot of data out there to support that professionals, by and large, and most importantly, the people that have it recognize that it's a challenge. So it really boils down to information, ignorance, awareness, more so than this indictment of humanity as a whole saying, everybody thinks this way. Don't bother because people will dismiss it. If you're talking to people that don't have it and haven't educated themselves on it, yeah, they're not going to get it because all they understand is their own experience and their own perspective. That's why education and awareness is so important. So people that are saying, no, it doesn't exist, it's a fraud, whatever, are people that are in denial of their own challenges, or people that simply, how do I put it? People that simply don't know better and are talking out of their backside, off the cuff, impulsively, without thinking it through, and have no data to back it up. In this instance, and chances are it's possibly a family member, a coworker, a friend who's saying this is a bunch of bunk, it's just a way that the pharmaceutical companies can make more money, offer them some information. Say, hey, I can see why you might think that, but I happen to have a link or an article or a resource that I'd like to share you that offers another side of this, or that offers another perspective. Instead of saying, well, you know what, you're totally wrong about that, and I've got a link to prove it, I don't imagine they're going to be more receptive if it becomes a I'm right, you're wrong conversation. But if it's about education, you can offer them information. You can lead the horse to water, but you can't make them drink. Some people will choose to remain ignorant, and unfortunately, this might be older parents, it might be siblings, it might be an educator, and some people just aren't willing to be informed. But that doesn't mean we give up on everybody. It's important that we educate where we can educate, because that's one of the ways we're going to shift the conversation to something more informed and more healthy, is by educating the ones who are teachable instead of simply throwing our hands up because we run into some armchair quarterbacks who think they know it all. Let's go back to the email, or the post rather. The next point my Facebook friend makes is, personally, I think saying ADHD is a mental disorder for neurotypicals. That means the average person. It would just give them justification to use it as an excuse to treat ADHD people like crap, the same way they treat other people with mental health issues like anxiety or depression, etc. The rationality is that, or I think she meant the reality, is that anyone who has a mental health condition in our society is mocked, ridiculed, or abused, or subject to paternalizing pity and feeling sorry for us kind of attitude. I don't want that. I don't want anyone to be condescending to me. The way I interpret that is she's talking about discrimination and stigma, which is a huge issue for anybody that has a mental health label. And that's really what I'm adamant about changing, is this idea that mental illness equals a person being dumb or less than or compromised or broken. This is an attitude problem. This is a cultural problem. It's a mindset problem. And whether you consider ADHD to be a mental health challenge or not does not change the fact that ADHD impacts how your mind works. It impacts how you problem solve, how you process language, how well you remember things. And I hate to break it to you, but whether you call it a mental health challenge or not, people around you are going to recognize that your brain works differently. They may make assumptions about you. They may start talking about you behind your back. And none of this information or these assumptions are being qualified by data, by information. So whether it's bipolar, whether it's anxiety, whether it's dyslexia or whatever it is, if it changes the way your brain works, they're going to make assumptions and stigmatize you and whatever else they do with that information, unless you are prepared to say, hold on a minute, you misunderstand. That's not what's true for me at all. Let me give you some information to better inform the situation. Now let's look at the other side of the conversation. It's not a mental health challenge. It's just another way that humanity expresses itself. Okay, what do you call it then? Do you still call it ADHD? Or do you call it, well, it's this nondescript thing that doesn't have any specific criteria, because if we did have specific criteria, then we'd be categorizing people, and then we'd have to label that categorization. So let's get rid of that altogether and just say this is me. Okay, very idealistic. And I see the point in that. Because if you see another person as just a variation of the norm that is equal to you in every way, except for some differences in how we process language and so on and so forth, without the label, without the criteria, what leverage do you have to encourage people to vary the way in which they interact with you, because your brain has different criteria, has a different way of working? If you want to be treated equally as everybody else, if you want to be treated equally as an equal like everybody else, then no one needs to bend at all to help include you. They can simply say, I'm treating you like everybody else. You need to step up your game and do it the way everybody else is doing it, or you're out of here. Is that really what you're going for here? Is that really what you want? Is you don't want to have the option to explain to people that, yeah, the way I do show up in the world varies from the norm in very specific ways. And I would like to ask of you to work with me by understanding certain things about me, by calling me out on certain behaviors that I'm trying to modify or monitor better. And I ask these things of you because I would like to be included, but I need some help to be able to do that. Unless you're able to point to something, a specific reason as to why anybody should bend or adjust or be flexible in any way to include you, there's no reason they should be any different towards you. So when you talk about not wanting to be excluded, wanting to be treated as an equal like everybody else, Where's the line? Where's the line at which you can ask for accommodations? You can ask for understanding. You can ask for patience because of your difference. Where do you draw the line? Because if it's all about being included, being treated as an equal to the point where there is no line, then I promise you, or at least I suspect, it's going to be a lot easier to exclude you, because the more you want to be treated like an equal, the less a person needs to acknowledge your uniqueness or your difference and work with you to accommodate it. Make sense? Let's see what else the post said. Friend states, which is why I like the concept of neurodiversity with ADHD and autism, because it forces other people to acknowledge us as equals and teaches them to respect and appreciate people whose brains are different than theirs. If we're gonna make any headway on this stuff, that's really where I think this process, if we're gonna make any headway on this stuff, that's really where I think this process will produce the best results. First of all, if you could force other people to accept you as equals, then the Civil Rights Act should have taken care of that problem when it comes to African Americans. You cannot legislate, you cannot print enough posters or pamphlets that demand somebody treat you as an equal. So thinking that because you have a philosophical argument that states that people with autism or dyslexia or ADHD should be treated like everybody else, that argument alone just doesn't hold water, because we've passed laws to encourage that. We've passed anti-discrimination laws, and it still happens. So what's the issue? The issue here is that people, by and large, are anxious around the unfamiliar. If they don't understand why you are the way you are, why you speak in a certain way, why you act differently, why you may seem like you're completely hyperactive and monologue and do things impulsively, just by virtue of seeing that and thinking, I don't know what to do with this, because it is so different from how I navigate the world. It's so different than the people I'm used to. I don't know what to do with this. It seems frightening to me. It must be wrong. It must be dangerous. You see how that goes? People's minds will go there anyway. You can't make them treat other people as equals. What you can do is become so self-aware and so self-educated and so self-empowered around showing the world the gifts you have to offer them. The fact that you don't feel shame in who you are. The fact that you feel at home in your own skin and that you are not a threat to them. And in fact, you would like the opportunity to educate them on why including you would actually make their life better. See, being an advocate, by embracing your differences, by embracing your uniqueness, and living from that place of authenticity, from that place of bravery, vulnerability, whatever you want to call it, it's by you finding strength in your differences. And I'm not saying this is easy. I've gone through years of therapy, of self-reflection, of crying, of fighting, acceptance of these different terms or labels or whatever you want to call them. I did not wake up one morning and say, I'm going to be the self-accepting, self-compassionate, empowered individual, and I'm going to educate the world on why they should include us. None of this came to me easily. The way I see things, my level of acceptance is hard won, my friend. I've gone through my share of resistance and denial and bitterness and anger before I arrived at some place where I could say, I feel at home enough about this that I feel I can now take the risk of putting myself out there and handle the pushback and handle the trolls and the blows that will come at me, challenging the ideas I now hold. So I'm not pretending for 1 second that anything I say in this video is going to end up in you immediately finding comfort in embracing the idea that there is room for understanding this as a mental health challenge, but also being able to say, I shouldn't be excluded for this reason. It doesn't make me dangerous because I have mental health difficulties. It doesn't make me less than or stupid or a chore to include in your life. It just means that I have this unique set of traits that if you were educated on them, you'd realize they're not dangerous, they're not a problem, and I might just be a very interesting person to have around. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. It's the all or nothing thinking, I suspect, that comes with having ADHD or being on the autism spectrum or just being part of Western culture that has a very black and white way of looking at things. The lens you use to view your experience is going to determine very strongly whether you see one side of this argument as detrimental and another as advantageous or vice versa. I suspect the solution lies somewhere in the middle. And if we continue to have this dialogue, I think we'll find it. But I don't know that the solution is in firmly planting yourself in one camp or the other. So let's keep having this conversation. And I suspect that as a community, we're going to find the answer together so that whether you find yourself with one of these labels or not, or whether you find yourself a part of the average folk that are just trying to make life work like the rest of us, I suspect that if we come together, we'll find a solution so that all of us feel at home with our neighbors as members of our community, regardless of what we choose to call ourselves. So hopefully this has been helpful. Hopefully it's something you feel like sharing with your community, and please feel free to reach out and ask any questions you have. That's why I'm here. Let's support each other into being our best selves. And as always, thanks for being you.